Venezuela goes to The Hague to ask the ICC to investigate U.S. sanctions as a crime against humanity. The former Brazilian President Lula da Silva visits Pope Francis and tells him how he managed to lift millions out of poverty. And the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa is repeatedly prevented from starting his State of the Nation address. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo in Quito, Ecuador. This is from the South. The Venezuelan government has presented a demand before the International Criminal Court to investigate and establish responsibility for the United States sanctions against Venezuela. It says they constitute crimes against humanity. The Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arraza, speaking in The Hague, denounced the unilateral coercive measures imposed on Venezuela. Lamenting the effects of the sanctions, the Bolivarian government is demanding an end to the suffering, pain, distress, and death caused to its citizens. Arraza said despite his country's afflictions, the government of President Nicolás Maduro continues to follow international law, committing to multilateralism while promoting social programs to alleviate the situation of the Bolivarian people. Venezuela's foreign minister said President Maduro had sent a letter to the ICC's prosecutor detailing the nation's case.
Hemos venido a las instancias que nos da.
We have come to this higher court to be able to confront an aggression which has manifested in multiple forms, an aggression against the Venezuelan people. We know that many peoples will be interested in accompanying this legal action which we have begun. We have put our heart into this. That's why we said the prosecutor and we insist that he apply international law. We need to apply reason. That's why I expect to see this through in the shortest period of time in order to give an effective response, with legal and moral and institutional authority to those responsible for these crimes against humanity, against the Bolivarian people of Venezuela.
Our correspondent Sergio Rodrigo is in The Hague with more.
As you mentioned, Venezuela has presented a lawsuit against the United States before the International Criminal Court in The Hague for crimes against humanity. The Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arraza presented before the court this lawsuit for crimes against humanity, provoked by the coercive and unilateral measures imposed by the United States since 2014 against Venezuela. These measures have had direct effects against the Venezuelan people, especially regarding health, education and food, and even migration. That is why Venezuelan Foreign Minister has presented this international lawsuit here in The Hague.
We thank Sergio Rodrigo for that report. Brazil's former President Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva has met with Pope Francis at the Vatican this Thursday as part of his two-day visit that started on Tuesday. They discussed social inequality as Pope Francis hopes to draw on Lula's experience to reduce the scourge affecting millions globally. The two have been longtime allies, with the Pope writing to a jailed Lula in 2018 expressing his solidarity. The meeting between both leaders was announced in January by Argentinian President Alberto Fernández during his visit to the nation. Our correspondent Ignacio Lemus has more.
Saludos, estudios. El expresidente Lula da Silva ya se encuentra.
The former Brazilian President Luis Inácio Lula da Silva has been in the Vatican to meet Pope Francis. The meeting was arranged with the help of the Argentinian President Alberto Fernández, who also met Pope Francis in the Vatican a few days ago. He managed to get the Pope to find a space in his schedule to make this meeting possible. Among the most important issues that Lula wanted to raise with the Pope is that of lawfare, the use of the courts to persecute progressive leaders in Latin America on the part of the neoliberal right. But they also talked about Lula's experience as president in reducing poverty in Brazil, when his PT government succeeded in lifting about 40 million people out of extreme poverty. This is a topic close to the Pope's heart, as is the issue of religious intolerance, which is on the rise in Brazil under the government of President Jair Bolsonaro.
We thank Ignacio Lemus for that report. Petrobras workers in Brazil are striking for the 13th consecutive day in rejection of the government's intention to privatize the public company. Brian Muir has more in this report.
Today marks day 12 of the largest petroleum workers' strike that's taken place in Brazil in over 25 years. All across the country, over 108 different centers of Petrobras State Petroleum Company, including offshore oil platforms, refineries, distribution terminals, fertilizer plants have all shut their doors as strikers and picketers have shut down the area in front of the plants and refused to go into work. There are over 20,000 people on strike. Petrobras headquarters has an office that's been taken over by a group of union negotiators who are refusing to leave. There have been protests in front of the big media companies demanding that they give coverage to the strike, which they've been ignoring. Now, this is just another step in the battle against the systematic dismantling of Petrobras, the state petroleum company, that's taken place since the 2016 parliamentary coup. Dilma Rousseff in 2014 issued a decree saying 100% of the profits from Petrobras would go towards public education and public health. That was immediately removed when coup President Michel Temer took over. And as the Bolsonaro government advances with its deep austerity cuts, they're systematically selling off the oil reserves and dismantling Brazil's capacity to be self-sufficient in energy. And this is one of the reasons the strike's going on, but it's also happening because they've announced 1,000 layoffs in Paraná, a fertilizer plant, and the company is trying to negotiate illegally, unilaterally with different workers' groups instead of with the union as a whole. So as the strike continues, the pressure builds on the media and on the government to give in to the union demands. And if this happens, it'll be one of the first major victories for unions since the labor reform laws were passed in 2017, which basically transformed Brazil into a right-to-work nation.
We thank Brian Muir for that report. As a team from the International Monetary Fund continues to visit Argentina for talks on restructuring the debt, the Vice President, Cristina Fernandez, has had a sharp exchange with the fund spokesperson in Washington. Responding to an earlier accusation, Gary Rice had insisted that no rules were broken in the granting of a massive $57 billion bailout to the previous president, Mauricio Macri. In reply, Cristina Fernandez posted a quote from the IMF's own rules where it says no country can use IMF funds to cover capital flight. No comment, tweeted Fernandez. Argentinians know how to read.
Protests in the streets of Buenos Aires as the auditors from the International Monetary Fund continue their one-week visit. They are examining the government's accounts, peeking through the Fernandez government's economic plan, and starting to renegotiate the foreign public debt.
We have the situation under control. Today, Argentina is not permitting the imposition of conditionalities on the economic program we are implementing. Do not doubt, ladies and gentlemen, members of Congress, that this whole government team will defend completely the interests of the Argentinian people.
The Argentinian people turned out en masse to demonstrate against the IMF and to support President Alberto Fernandez's proposal to restructure the debt.
Today we are in this demonstration to say, strength to you, Alberto, the debt is to the people, and to show that the social movements, the unemployed organizations, and the anti-imperialist left is defending Argentina against the investment funds like Fidelity, which are provoking and extorting the country very aggressively.
Rescheduling payments and a substantial haircut, as proposed by the government, are also the demands these protesters are making of the International Monetary Fund.
We believe it is important for the people to mobilize in support of a government that is standing up to the IMF, because it is impossible to pay the debt with hunger, precarious jobs.
We are in favor of fulfilling the popular mandate expressed in the presidential elections, which is that the government of Alberto and Cristina achieve an agreement, a renegotiation, to get the country out of the disaster left by Macri and put an end to hunger in Argentina.
The demonstrators also agree with the government that the debt incurred by the government of Mauricio Macri is unpayable.
If we pay the debt in the conditions in which Macri left us, the only result will be that the people continue for decades to be sunk in poverty, with all the problems that means for independent social and economic development. We can't pay. The payments, at the very least, have to be rolled over so that the country can grow and the main debt, which is to the people, can be paid. And then we can put Argentina back on its feet and be able to pay the debts as appropriate.
The Argentinian people have already suffered the consequences of the IMF's prescriptions, and that is why they are rejecting its interference and impositions.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. In South Africa, the 2020 State of the Nation address was suspended temporarily 55 minutes into the meeting, with President Cyril Ramaphosa unable to begin after 3 attempts. Speaker of the National Assembly, Thandi Modise, suspended the House proceedings as the economic freedom fighters raised continuous points of orders. The EFF has said it was going to disrupt Ramaphosa's State of the Nation if he didn't drop the Minister of Public Enterprises, Pravin Gordhan, who they accuse of planning to privatize companies like South African Airways, Eskom and others, and dropping black executives in those companies. The EFF were also against the attendance of F.W. de Klerk, the last president of the apartheid regime, who in an interview 2 weeks ago said apartheid was not a crime against humanity.
I have made a ruling
Just ask him if
that
he
no
did actually threaten
Honorable
us.
Gadi, take your seat or leave this house.
Honorable Speaker, we can help you with the
Member, take
passage.
your seat or please,
We can help you to show you who
No,
threatened
I
violence.
don't want your help. You take your seat now or leave in peace.
No, I'm saying because you say
take
you
your
didn't.
seat now or leave.
I'm helping.
You take this seat, Honorable Mukwena, or leave. Honorable Mkalipi, if you stand, you are prepared to walk out.
And lawmakers of the Economic Freedom Fighters bench left the chamber in unison. They were chanting for the ouster of Minister of Public Enterprises, Pravin Gordhan. The EFF had recently called for the clerk to be stripped of his Nobel Peace Prize.
Pravin must go. Samnandas must go. Please leave. Please leave.
President Ramaphosa eventually did deliver his address, and among the main issues he dealt with were the problems at the state energy company Eskom. He said the government is looking to alternative sources, including outside Eskom.
Over the next few months, as Eskom works to restore its operational capabilities, we will be implementing measures that will fundamentally change the trajectory of energy generation in our country. We are taking the following measures to rapidly and significantly increase generation capacity outside of Eskom. The Section 34 ministerial determination will be issued by the Minister of Energy, Mineral Resources and Energy, shortly to give effect to the Integrated Resource Plan of 2019, enabling the development of additional grid capacity from renewable energy, natural gas, hydropower, battery storage, as well as coal. We will initiate the procurement of emergency power from projects that can deliver electricity into the grid within 3 to 12 months from approval.
Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has extended its global emergency designation for the Ebola outbreak in DR Congo. The recent outbreak was first identified in August of 2018 and has since killed more than 2,300 people in eastern DR Congo. Our correspondent Oscar Epildi from Kinshasa has the details.
The World Health Organization and its committee of experts decided yesterday in Geneva to renew the declaration of international health emergency for the Ebola outbreak in North Kivu and in Ituri. The new confirmed cases of Ebola are becoming increasingly rare. Last week there were only 3 new cases, but the theoretical risk makes it necessary to continue considering it as an international emergency. That's what the WHO chief, Tedros Adhanom, has said. It would be time to consider as an urgency the strengthening of the national health system as part of the rationale of the allowance of funds for the fight against the Ebola outbreaks in the DRC. At the same time, security remains critical both in the great north of Kivu and in Ituri, where arms continue to kill and displace civilians despite military advances against the IDF. The small-scale massacres continue to occur, killing peasants, but also blocking out the democratic evolution of social institutions.
We thank our correspondent for that report. Moving on, in Bolivia, lawmakers of the movement towards socialism decided to act on the legal persecution aimed at their leaders and party members.
The candidate for the presidency for the movement towards socialism, Luis Arce, is a victim of persecution through the courts. As soon as he was nominated, he was included as an accused in an open judicial process from 4 years back for supposed corruption. The senators of the movement towards socialism decided to act.
Beginning today, we are going to accompany all the hearings of our leaders who are being accused of terrorism, of sedition, so that we can be witnesses of the Bolivian judicial system, so that it behaves within the framework of due process, of guarantees of objectivity and impartiality.
The MAS has 2/3 of representatives in both chambers. In the lower house, a statement was approved denouncing persecution and calling for respect for the human rights of those affected.
It is not only a council, but it is also corroborated by the pronouncement that was made by the United Nations. The international community is concerned by this type of attitudes. We hope that this is reflected on and agreed upon.
The People's Ombudsman accompanied and denounced the processes whereby political leaders have been prosecuted through the courts, all of whom have been leaders and people with connections to the movement towards socialism. Those who have criticized the de facto government have also been targeted.
We believe, as the Ombudsman of the people, that no process or persecution, any person, former official, current authority, leader, non-leader, person who will or will not be a candidate, should be tolerated in any form. And here, the fundamental role of the Supreme Electoral Court is important.
The way in which prosecutors and judges operate, obedient to the de facto government, has been to arrest people and accuse them of sedition, terrorism, and of causing economic harm to the state. They have ordered a minimum 6 months of preventative jail.
This would be an abuse of criminal justice system. We are conducting a case-by-case review. Currently, we have 99 people who have been processed from the cases we've been seeing since the beginning of the month of November. Since then, there have been another percentage. And of the 99, currently 45 of them are still being held in jail as preventive measure.
Following the November 10th coup, the de facto government launched a hunt against those who opposed it. International organizations like the United Nations have expressed concern and have demanded that the legal persecution cease.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. Japan has recorded its first death from the coronavirus COVID-19, making it only the third fatality outside mainland China, where the death toll currently stands at 1,367. The Chinese government has since sacked 2 top-ranking officials in Hubei province after reports that over 60,000 people contracted the virus. Authorities say the more than 13,300 extra cases reported in China's Hubei province on Wednesday is caused by a new reporting method and relate to a period going back over days and weeks.
All provinces and cities and the Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps reported 15,152 newly confirmed cases, including 13,332 cases of clinical diagnosis in Hubei. There are 174 fewer severe cases, 254 new deaths, of which 242 are in Hubei, 2 in Henan, 1 in Tianjin, Hebei, Liaoning, Heilongjiang, Anhui, Shandong, Guangdong, Guangxi, Hainan and Xinjiang, respectively, and newly increased 2,807 suspected cases.
Upping its efforts to contain the virus, the government has also sent 2,600 military medical personnel and supplies to Wuhan, the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak. This marks the third deployment of military medics in the effort to contain the outbreak. The newly sent personnel will be in charge of patients at 2 hospitals, set to open a joint total of 1,560 beds. The World Health Organization says it's way too early to say when the COVID-19 might end, but the organization is already working on 4 vaccines.
There are already 4 vaccine candidates in development, and it's likely that there will be 1 or 2 that will go into human trials in about 3 to 4 months from now. So that itself would be a very rapid progress.
As of this morning, only 8 cases globally, we could not find a plausible explanation for their exposure. So on a global level, we have a good view on this virus, certainly in terms of the existing transmission chains. And we have tracked each and every event, each and every transmission across borders.
Moving on, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has reshuffled his cabinet exactly 2 months after his majority victory in the December elections. In a shocking move, the Exchequer Sajid Javid and the Attorney General Geoffrey Cox have both resigned. Javid reportedly stepped down after he refused to sack his advisors just weeks ahead of the budget presentation. And the Northern Ireland Minister Julian Smith was fired despite him persuading rival parties to return to the power-sharing government after 3 years of deadlock. The UN Security Council on Wednesday adopted a resolution calling for a lasting ceasefire in war-torn Libya, endorsing a roadmap for ending the conflict and condemning the recent increase in violence. The resolution received 14 votes in favor, with Russia abstaining. It condemns the recent blockade of oil facilities and demands that all countries refrain from intervening in the conflict and uphold a weapons embargo. It also recognizes the key role of African nations in ending the violence, notably the African Union and League of Arab States.
With the adoption of this resolution, the Security Council sent an important signal for peace in Libya, reaffirming the concrete commitments of all participants of the Berlin Conference. It is crucial for Libya that we are able to send this signal of unity.
Venezuelan and Cuban producers attended the largest fair of Russian foods, Prodexpo 2020, with attractive proposals for the Russian market. Let's have a look.
Russia and Latin America are expanding their commercial relations. Companies from 9 countries of the region attended the Prodexpo 2020, the largest food fair held in Moscow, looking for a position in this market. Cuba and Venezuela are 2 of the Latin American nations which are showcasing, with attractive offers for Russian consumers.
This market has evolved a lot. It has grown, and it's much more firm. The acquisitive power has been increased. The consumption is selective, and always with preferred qualities, such as the Venezuelan cacao.
In addition to cacao, Venezuela offers foreign buyers products with a high added value. They're looking to increase exports in the country and win space in Russia, as well as in the rest of Europe.
We are witnessing an interesting market that really puts an emphasis in the origins. And as from Venezuela, who work firsthand with productive communities, with associations, we seek differentiations between different places to create special profiles of liquors made from cacao, a good butter from cacao, and soon different prototypes of special chocolate.
From Cuba, the Agricultural Business Group also intends to increase exports of citrus and preserved foods, which have been met by a good reception by buyers and participants of the event.
This will be the first step to be able to place Cuba's agriculture and industrial production in the Russian markets and replace imports and to gradually increase exports.
Latin America aspires to consolidate commercial exchange with Russia, a market with great investment possibilities and which has grown in recent years.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and more stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media as well. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Until next time.